cover circles today, equations of circle. The general equation, if the center is at the origin, is x squared plus y squared equals r squared, where r is the radius. And if the circle has been shifted with a center of hk, then we get x minus h quantity squared plus y minus k quantity squared equals r squared. So I'm going to do some examples that will be similar to the types of problems you'll be asked to do on your homework. So first of all, find the center and radius of the circle and sketch its graph. Well, notice on the first one that we have just x squared plus y squared. So the center is located at 0, 0. And the radius, remember that this is r squared. So the radius is the square root of 5, and I don't have to consider plus or minus because it can't be a negative radius. If you evaluate that on your calculator, you get about, and 2.2 would be sufficient here because we're just going to estimate where it is on the graph. So to sketch the graph of this, I'm going to mark the center even though it's not really part of the circle. Then because the radius is 2.2, and if I'm counting by ones here, then I'm going to mark off about 2.2 this direction, these 4 directions. And then I'm just going to do my best to draw a circle. Okay, so there would be our circle. So for the next one, notice that there is h is 0, k is 2, so the center is 0, 2. The radius is the square root of 4, which is 2. So I'm going to mark a point at 0, 2. The radius is 2, so I'm going to mark off 2 in each direction. And then draw in the circle. Okay, and on this last one I have here, the next one, we've got, this time it's shifted both directions, horizontally and vertically. So our center is -1, -2. The radius is the square root of 36, which is 6. So -1, -2. From there, I'm going to mark off 6. In each direction. And yeah, good luck with drawing a circle. So let's see if I can do this way. Yes. Okay, so there we have our circle. It's not, oh, I can even make it green. That didn't work. Oh well. Next problem. All right, so on this one, find an equation of the circle that satisfies the given conditions. A center, so remember this is h, this is k, a radius of 3. So remember our formula, x minus h quantity squared plus y minus k quantity squared equals r squared. And yes, it does not get any easier than this. Three squared is 9. Don't forget to square that. Okay, so we have x plus 1. Those are going to change signs since it's x minus h. It's minus a -1. And y minus a -3. So we get our equation. And on the next problem. So for this one, our center is -1, 5, and it passes through the point -4, -6. So I'm going to use a strategy that we have used before. I have the equation written right here. So I'm going to mark down what I know so far. Well, I know this is k, h, and I know this is k. So I know x minus a -1, so x plus 1 quantity squared plus y minus 5 quantity squared equals r squared. But I don't know r. So what I can do, since it passes through this point, that means this is on the circle, which means this value for x and this value for y have to make the equation true. So I'm going to substitute in a -4 for x and a -6 for y. and then solve for r squared. So we get negative 3 quantity squared is 9. Here we have negative 11 quantity squared is 121. So I get 130. And remember, we are writing the equation, so I actually want r squared. So I don't really have to think about I'm not drawing the graph of it. If I was, I'd want to know what the radius was. So now I can write the equation. So we have x plus 1 quantity squared plus y minus 5 quantity squared equals 130. Okay, so for this next one, we're asked to find an equation of the circle that satisfies the given conditions. The endpoints of a diameter are point P, which is negative 1, 3, and point Q, which is 7, negative 5. So think about if you had a circle and you knew the endpoints of a diameter. Well, what's right in the middle of those 2 points? It has to be the center of the circle. So we just have to find the midpoint in between these 2 points so that we know the center. Well, the midpoint is just the average of those. So to find the center, you're going to average the x's and average the y's, which is really just the midpoint formula. So we have negative 1 plus 7 divided by 2. And, oops, get rid of that. And we have 3 plus negative 5 divided by 2. So that gives me 3, 6 over 2, and here we'll have negative 1. So my center is 3, negative 1. So what does that mean? I know x minus 3 quantity squared plus y plus 1 quantity squared equals r squared. I'm now in the exact same situation I was in the previous problem. You can pick either one of the 2 points. I'm going to use this one and call that x and y and plug them in. So I get negative 1 minus 3 quantity squared plus 3 plus 1 quantity squared equals r squared. By the way, it wouldn't matter which point you use. Since they're both on the circle, they both make the equation true. So we have negative 4 squared is a positive 16, and here we get 16, so the radius is 32. And now we have x minus 3 quantity squared plus y plus 1 quantity squared equals 32. And that is our equation of our circle. All right, so for this one, we're also trying to find the equation. The circle lies in the first quadrant, and it's tangent to both x and y axes. So you got to remember what tangent means. First of all, I'm just going to think about a little sketch. It's in the first quadrant, so we only need quadrant 1. And my circle is tangent. Remember, tangent means that if the circle is tangent to the x and y axes, it means it only touches the axes in one spot. So it kind of is this, and that's a horrible circle. So let's try that again. So it's kind of this idea here. So we have this circle in the first quadrant. It's tangent to the x and y axes, and the radius is 5. So that means if the radius is 5, that means it's 5 this direction. It's also 5 this direction. So that's the radius. So you can see then that my center would have to be, because I would have to go over 5 and up 5. So the center would have to be 5, 5. And which means also, and we know the radius is 5. So that's all I need. So we have x minus 5 quantity squared plus y minus 5 quantity squared equals r squared, which is 25. So that one's not hard. Really just remembering or understanding what it means to be tangent to both the x and y axes. Okay, so this next one, find the equation of the circle shown in the figure. Well, notice that the center appears to be negative 1, 1. And as far as finding the radius, literally you can count. So if this is the center, and notice that I go over 3 in each direction, so the radius is 3. So then that's enough to write our equation, x minus negative 1, so x plus 1 quantity squared, plus y minus 1 quantity squared equals 3 squared is 9. And that's it. Okay, next, show that the equation represents a circle and find the center and radius of the circle. Well, we're going to have to complete the square for this problem. And because we have both an x squared and a y squared as well as linear terms, we have to complete the square for both the x's and the y's, but I promise you it's not that bad. So what you're going to do is you're going to gather up the terms that are alike, well, not really alike, but x squared minus 2x. I'm going to put a little plus blank for my completing the square, plus y squared minus 2y plus blank equals 2 plus blank plus blank. So notice that I just have the setup for the x's, I have the setup for the y's, but the constant still has to be on the other side, which it started out that way, so it already was. You're going to still take this linear term, the coefficient, take half of that and square it. So when I do that, half of negative 1 or half of negative 2 is negative 1, square it, you get a 1. Whatever you do to one side, you do to the other. Same thing here, also negative 1, square it. So we get this. Okay, so now we have x minus 1 quantity squared plus y minus 1 quantity squared equals 4. And we're done, because that's all we needed to do. That's the equation of the circle. So we know it represents a circle because it's the right format. The center of this circle is 1, 1, and the radius of this circle is 2, because it's the square root of 4. So remember, if you're struggling on where does this number come from, whatever you did when you took half of this, it was negative 1, that's what goes here. Remember, if you FOILed this out or put it in a box or multiplied it out, x minus 1 times x minus 1, you will get x squared minus 2x plus 1. So I'm just writing it in that perfect square format. All right, so for this one, we are also going to complete the square, but notice that I don't have a linear term for the x, which means I don't have to complete the square for the x, just the y. So I'm going to start off, so I can just leave the x square alone, and I'll have y squared plus 6y plus blank. Move the constant to the other side, so we have negative 2 plus blank. We're not doing anything with the x squared. Half of 6 is 3, square it, you get 9. So now we have x squared plus y plus 3 quantity squared equals 7. So that means the center of the circle, remember h is 0, so we have 0, negative 3, and the radius, remember 7 is r squared, so the radius is the square root of 7. And the last problem, again, it's going to be completing the square. This time we have linear terms for the x and y, so we're going to have to complete the square for both. So I'm going to get x squared plus 2x plus blank plus y squared plus y plus blank equals negative 1 plus blank plus blank. Okay, completing the square, you take half of this term and square it, so I get a 1. Add to both sides. Half of a 1 is a fourth. I'm sorry, it's a half. But then you're going to square that and get a fourth. So we're going to have a fourth right here. Not a big deal. So now when I write this, I'm going to have x plus 1 quantity squared plus y plus a half quantity squared equals, this cancels out, we have a fourth. So there's my equation. It doesn't matter that you got a fraction. So the center is negative 1, negative a half. And the radius, remember this is r squared, and if you take the square root of a fourth, you square root the 1, square root the 4, you get 1/2. And that's the radius. And that is it.